With the announcement of Far Cry 6, there's tons of speculation and talk within the community about what the future title here in the Far Cry franchise may all encompass. And we've gotten a lot of information at this point in time about Far Cry 6, but of course there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of rumblings going on about the ins and outs of what this game is going to all be about and where this could be connected in some way or form to Far Cry 3 or one of the other Far Cry games. Well, with that, guys, I wanted to go ahead and do the top 5 things that we want in Far Cry 6. And when I say we, guys, I'm mainly going to give you guys my opinion here, but some of you may agree, some of you may disagree. Let me know in the comment section down below what things you want to see in Far Cry 6. So let's get into it. So, guys, at number 1 for me, with Far Cry 6, I want this game in one way, shape, or form, whether we're talking the leaks that have come out about Diego, the young boy in the trailers, being a young Voss from Far Cry 3, or all these different rumors that are going around and speculation of the, when, in which game this kind of ties into. I would like, regardless, this game to tie into the overarching story of Far Cry as a whole. I think that Far Cry, even though each of these games is different in their own ways, I feel like there's, similar to the Assassin's Creed games that Ubisoft also owns, I feel like this is all tied together. All the games are tied together in one way, shape, or form, and I would like to see that happen here with Far Cry 6, where they kind of tie things off a little bit, not necessarily like they close out the franchise or something, but I mean, they start tying up some loose ends around, the course of the story and such, and kind of tie this game into some of the other Far Cry games, whether it's Far Cry 5 or Far Cry 3 or all of them at the same time. It'd be very interesting to see what they decide to do there, but I'd like to see them tie Far Cry 6 into the other Far Cry games. At number 2 for me, guys, I really think this really comes down to the campaign for me, is I just don't want Ubisoft to force the players, as in us guys, when we're playing the game, to do side missions in order to move forward in the story. So from Far Cry 5 and even some of the Assassin's Creed titles and such, the more recent ones, of course, Origins and Odyssey in particular, there has been a point in time when you're playing the story and you might get really invested into what's happening in the single player story, and then all of a sudden you have to do all these side missions in order to move forward with, into the story and find out what happens. And I'll give you an example. You needed all these resistance points and such in Far Cry 5 in order to move forward in taking on one of the villains or one of the members of the family in Far Cry 5. And I get the concept, and I understand that they want you to kind of do the totality of the game, do a bunch of the side missions and such in order to move forward. But the problem with that, in my opinion, is that it takes you out of the main story. I remember there was a couple of points in the course of Far Cry 5 when I was playing, even though I love Far Cry 5, it's one of my favorite Far Cry titles in the series. The thing about it was I'm in the midst of, doing these main missions, and then all of a sudden I can't move forward because I don't have enough resistance points, and so I have to go back and do, a bunch of side missions to get the resistance points to move forward with the main story. And what that did was that took me out of the main story, and then when I came back to the main story once again, I almost forgot where we even left off. So what I'm getting at, I just want them to not have the side missions. It's great to have side missions, and I'll talk about that here shortly, but I think it's great to have more ways to connect with the franchise, but sometimes I like to do the side missions at my own pace, not necessarily when I'm in the midst of something significant going on in the main story. Coming in at number 3 for me, guys, is multiplayer and co-op. I love the Far Cry arcade that they put together and such, but I would really like to see this expanded upon in Far Cry 6. I'd love to have some PvP, some PvE elements, and really have it. I've always said this, that Far Cry was, meant to be a really great first-person shooter, just game as a whole from a standpoint of multiplayer. The campaign's great, but I mean, just from the multiplayer perspective, playing PvP, having all kinds of different kinds of game modes and such, I think would be great moving into Far Cry 6. So I would love them to expand upon what they did with Far Cry 5 and add more modes, and co-op would be great, guys, having more co-op, more ways to connect with the franchise, essentially, where after you're done playing the single player story, you can play some co-op missions, you can play against other people out there in, multiplayer in a PvP realm, or just go up against waves and waves of enemies in PvE with your friends or whatever the case might be. So just expanding upon what they kind of did with Far Cry 5, I'd love to see here in Far Cry 6. And then coming in, guys, at number 4, one thing I would love to do is, Far Cry has been known to have the fast travel mechanism, which I think is great, but I would love there to be more things to do along the journey so that you may not even want to necessarily do the fast travel so much. So what I'm getting at is that the world that you're exploring, it'd be great to have tons of different stuff, even more things to do than ever in a Far Cry game along the journey, and just more and more ways you can connect with the franchise and such. I'm not really stating like they go the route of like Red Dead Redemption 2 where they had no fast travel at all. I still think it's good to have an option there, but I would love to have just lots of things to do along the journey, you know, while you're traveling on the road, whether you're traversing the world through, you know, riding on a horse or riding in a tank in Far Cry 6, or if you're, whatever the case might be, just having multiple things that you can do along the journey, more and more that you can learn about the story, learn about the lore of Far Cry and Far Cry 6 in particular, more collectibles, more things that you can get along the way. That kind of leads you to like the customization and such, doing things that help you customize your weaponry, customize your character, things of that nature. And that leads me, guys, to number 5, which they've really shown us in the, you know, reveals here of Far Cry 6. They've showed that we're going to have some new characters. We're going to have some new enemies, it seems. We're going to have, like, new locations and such. But I think that the big thing there is just, I think there needs to be more of a focal point on our, you know, on the main characters. You know, I think it's great that our character, Danny, is going to have a voice here. And I absolutely love that because it's going to be a better way to really connect with this character, which we haven't really been able to do for a while in Far Cry. And so I'm really excited to get to know Danny and learn about the story here, the backstory, and just understand where this character is coming from. But that also leads me into Giancarlo Esposito's character. Of course, you know, learning more about Diego, Anton Castillo, of course, who's Giancarlo Esposito. What I'm getting at is learning as much as we can about them. Like, I feel like in some of these Far Cry games, they have, like in Voss in Far Cry 3, I felt like they did a really good job of having him front and center a number of times where you're really getting to start to learn about this character. The thing about it, though, is that you don't really learn about their backstory much. It's just more about what's happening right then and right there. Whereas with this story, I would really like to learn more backstory on Anton Castillo, of course, Diego, learning a lot about those characters and having them more front and center than we've ever seen in one of these Far Cry games. I felt with Far Cry 5, you had front and center with some of these characters, but a lot of times it just felt like, you know, there was a number of the characters, you know, with like Faith Seed and you know, all these different, you know, characters that were villains in Far Cry 5. It felt like some of that screen time was taken away from some of the main characters because, you know, you're focusing on a number of these other characters, even though they were and they helped support the story. I just would like to see more of a front and center of the villain, especially here in Far Cry 6. But with that, guys, obviously I want there to be some familiarity to, you know, to the Far Cry of the past, but also kind of, you know, continue moving forward with this franchise. You know, having new characters is great, having new enemies, having some new locations, new environments, which we're obviously going to be getting. But I would also like to see some similarities to the other games, you know, so having some similar, you know, characters, some similar enemies and such, just so that we kind of get that feel of Far Cry as a whole. And I'm sure we will, guys, from the screenshots and such. I'm really excited about this game. I think there's a lot to be excited about. What are the things though that you want to see in Far Cry 6? Let me know in the comment section down below. And for more Far Cry 6 content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.